So you've heard about Darktide, the newish game from Games Workshop, and you're considering buying it, but you haven't made up your mind just yet. Maybe you've been burned by Games Workshop's video game offerings in the past. Yeah, there's been a lot of shovelware. Or maybe you've seen a couple of YouTube clips about people that have some issues with the game. So you take all this in combination and you're just not sure if you want to spend your money on buying this game or just buying some Games Workshop plastic toys and painting them up and adding them to your army. Well, this preview then is for you. I'll tell you all about my experiences with Darktide in my short time with it, but not from a perspective of a hardcore video game reviewer. I am not one of those people, but more of a Warhammer 40K fan and also a gamer, but a filthy casual. Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George. Normally on this channel, we spend our time talking about magnetizing models, building models, buying models, and painting them up. But Darktide just came out recently and has captured a lot of attention, especially from those of us who are all about the Warhammer 40K universe. So let's talk about what Darktide is. It's a cooperative shooter, which means that you'll team up with 3 other people and go into a digital arena and shoot up bad guys. In this case, it's Chaos Cultists from, I think, the Nurgle Persuasion, so space zombies, really. You'll spend your time shooting, punching, cutting, and magicking things into little piles of goo so that you can complete your mission objective. In exchange for participating in these sometimes gruesome battles, you get experience and the occasional reward that makes you a little bit better at the next battlefield. Now I say shooter because shooting is an element of the game and it looks an awful lot like a video game, like a first-person shooter. But since this is Warhammer 40K, you're going to be spending a lot of time locked in melee combat, so shooting is just part of what you'll be doing, and I want to say it's the least important part of what you'll be doing, depending on what character class you're taking. For the most part, you will engage seas of zombies and slice them up with your chainsword, your axe, your dagger, whatever you happen to have in hand. You're going to use those to beat those zombies up to a nice chunky pulp. So the label cooperative shooter says some things and it leaves a few things out. Here's what it says. Your primary opponents in this arena or in these battles that you are going to engage in are not other players. It's 4 players against digital opponents. So, AI-driven baddies. It's what the gaming community likes to call a PvE, or a player versus environment. At least I think the E stands for environment. I'm not 100% sure anymore. But another good way of making sense of what this label means is by comparing it to other video games that have this label as well. So probably the most relevant comparison is something like Vermintide. You've probably heard of Vermintide. It's basically this game, but it's set in the Age of Sigmar or even Warhammer Fantasy setting. I'm not entirely sure. Basically, instead of Space Marines and Inquisitors, you get witch hunters and, knights. But if you haven't played Vermintide, you might be at a loss for what I mean. If you've ever played Destiny or Destiny 2, this game is cut along the same cloth. It's basically a team. You go out, you fight PvE, you gain resources, and you rinse and repeat kind of over and over and over. That's the core game loop. It's a pretty popular type of game if you're into that sort of thing. Darktide is basically just that, but it has a Warhammer 40K skin over it. And yeah, that's the gist. So what kinds of things will you find yourself doing in Darktide? Well, the first thing is you have to choose between one of 4 different classes. You have your Preacher, you have your Psyker, you have your Veteran, and you have your Ogryn. The Preacher is a frontline kind of combat person. So they go around and they chop zombies to bits to make sure that the less tanky team members behind you, hopefully, can do their things to contribute to your team's success. The Preacher has kind of a combination of hand-to-hand weapons and a kind of a ranged weapons. They're mostly hand-to-hand, but they do have a bit of a ranged component to it. My personal favorite is that they get to use a big old chainsaw to cleave through hordes of enemies. On the other hand, they can use a variety of weapons, but my personal favorite is the Hand Flamer. This thing burns through hordes as well. Having one of each of these in hands and your Preacher is darn near impossible to take down. You could also choose a Psyker, and I'm less familiar with this class because I don't have one of these characters, but I've played with these characters in my team, and they're pretty cool. They dish out a lot of damage at range. Their responsibility is to get rid of the big elite baddies so they don't come up close to you and knock you out of the fight. They can use a variety of weapons, but their standouts are the Power Sword and like a Force Staff of some sort that helps them channel their magical abilities. The Veteran is basically a shooty boy. That person's skill set is to shoot downrange very accurately, and so as a result they use las guns, and they can pick out targets from far away so that you don't have to close the distance while those baddies are shooting at you. They also have a hand-to-hand weapon, but that's not their primary armament, but even the shooty boy is gonna find themselves surrounded by a sea of zombies at one point or the other, so they need at least a trusty sword. Finally, and what I thought was my favorite, but the Preacher took center stage recently, is the Ogren. This is the big boy of the group. You'd think he's more of a tank, but he's kinda not. He has a lot of HP and can help you weather large storms of enemies. He's got some awesome abilities to help you control the amount of people around you, and he dishes out lots of pain with a really interesting variety of both ranged and hand-to-hand weapons. My personal favorite is a Cleaver of all things. That thing just slices through tons of enemies at the same time, but he's also got this big old slab shield that you can use to control the crowd, make sure that snipers don't pop off your head, and most importantly, when you encounter big bosses, your Ogren with a slab shield can absorb a ton of damage while everyone else on your team focuses that big baddie down. Okay, so we've established what Darktide is, and we've established what the player will be doing while they're in the game. And some of this might help you make your decision, but in order to really hone in on whether you should buy it or not, we have to talk about what is good about Darktide and what is not so good about Darktide. Let's face it, modern gaming, you're going to have a little bit of good and a little bit of bad, and there's no avoiding it. There's no perfect release. At least in my experience, every game, no matter how cool it ends up being, usually starts off pretty janky. The good news is that Darktide is fairly jank-free. Now, your mileage may vary, but by and large, at least in my experience, the game runs well, and it does what it purports to do. It teams you up with a bunch of people, and you go out and you have mindless fun slaying the enemies of the God Emperor. I haven't had any problems with the game crashing. I haven't had any connection issues. I haven't had any performance issues either, but I understand that there's a lot of people out there who are experiencing these things, and they're having some trouble getting the developers and the publishers to kind of fix the issue. And yeah, it's a thing. Modern gaming just doesn't seem to be complete without stories like this, and I know those struggles firsthand. There's plenty of video game releases that I've bought on the day of launch, and I just can't even start it up. There are a few that I can't start up even months after release. Yeah, you buy the thing, and you need some kind of crazy connection. I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of games out there that start off, and they're either unplayable at the beginning, or they're just They chug along and you don't have a great experience, and so you stop playing the game. At least for me, I haven't had that experience. It's performing well, it's performing reliably, I'm having a good time. But that's not the kind of the most important part of this game. Although I will say, compared to other recent releases, I find that Darktide for me has been relatively less painful to enjoy than other games that I've played in recent memory. I'm looking at you, Battlefield 2042, and really any other Battlefield game that's ever released. Being able to run a game seems like the most important thing in any game launch, and it's not like, oh hey, I'm patting you on the back, you are able to turn on and run the game. That really shouldn't be a compliment, but in the modern environment, it kind of has to be. Congrats on getting the game to launch, yay? But at least, they got it done. But that isn't one of the things that stands out to me as great about Darktide. The thing that stands out to me is just how Warhammer 40K this darn title is. It positively oozes Warhammer 40K grimdark space gothic. It is all over the place. The game spaces, the environments that you find yourself battling zombies in, they're amazing. They feel huge. Granted, the arenas that you're playing with are actually fairly linear, and you don't really get to explore much. There's basically a line from A to B where your objective is, and there's a couple of branching paths, sort of, kind of, but for the most part, it's a fairly linear arena. But as you're looking around, you don't get the feeling that there's a bunch of places that you can't go. You're in a hive city, and the space is enormous, and you feel every kilometer that is above you. You look up, and there's hive city above. You look down sometimes, and there's hive city below. There's tanks inside the hive city. There are Valkyries zooming around inside the hive city. It blew my mind, and every time I go in there, I see a little detail that I just French kiss. Okay, that was a two-handed French kiss. I love it. It's positively brilliant 40K world building. To add to this 40K world building, and I think one of the major strengths of Darktide compared to other Warhammer 40K releases is the weapons themselves. I mean, you're going to spend most of your time aiming down the sights of a gun or swinging some kind of melee weapon. They better look and feel good, and they better look and feel like Warhammer 40K, because what is this game if not about weapons? And boy, Darktide delivers in this area. You have a couple of varieties of las guns and las pistols, and they look exactly the way you imagine them. I don't mean the tiny little models that you paint, because yes, they look a lot like them, except they have way more detail. They look a lot cooler, and they're the right size. As I'm playing it, I could kind of imagine myself holding this las gun. I know, it's a las gun. Why am I so impressed by it? Well, it's the most important weapon in the Imperium. It's produced in probably the trillions. It is the mainstay weapon of the Imperium of Man, and boy, it looks incredible, and it sounds even better. The snap crack of the laser as it's coming out of the barrel, it's amazing. And yes, in the future, light makes sounds. Let's just make peace with that. Another standout weapon is the hand flamer that the preachers use. Holy cow, this thing looks exactly like the hand flamer that you see on your miniatures. It has that little muzzle thing with the perforations. It has that tank that you screw onto the bottom. It looks exactly like you imagined it. And the sound, the whooshing of the flames escaping the nozzle, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And honestly, no Warhammer 40K weapon discussion would be complete without a bolter, and Darktide has bolters. Yes, your non-Space Marine common human beings can handle a bolter, apparently. And honestly, if you look at some of your Imperial Guard models, if you are fortunate enough to have any, some of them have typically bolt pistols. But if you have some Inquisition dudes, they'll probably also have some kind of bolt pistol, and that's what you have here. And they look really cool, but the most important thing is how they sound. And to me, holy cow, this development team got the sound of the bolt firing. They nailed it. It's perfect. I want to keep hearing it all the time. So you've got the ambiance that's locked down. You have the weapons that look incredible and they sound amazing. What about the actual gameplay? Well, you know what? It's pretty darn good. It's very satisfying. You do have the sense of being this powerful yet still very human, well, except for the Ogryn, frail kind of person. you're walking around in this sea of zombies. At any moment, you can get snuck up and someone will eat your face, or you can be mobbed by 20, 30 zombies at a time, and you can cleave through a bunch of them, but you never feel absolutely safe. So it's this nice balance of, I am not a superhero, but I'm a very, very powerful person, but I am never safe because this hive world is treacherous. There's a couple of encounters that you'll have in the game. Sometimes you have elites, sometimes you have waves, sometimes you have bosses. My personal favorite is when you have hordes, where there's an alarm that goes off behind you, and you hear it, and you know that this horde is coming, and you have what feels like hundreds of poxwalkers. I keep calling them zombies because that's effectively what they are, but Warhammer 40K speak, they're poxwalkers. They're running at you, and you have to defend your teammates or your objective, and you just start cutting or flaming or shooting or magicking. Those are by far the most entertaining encounters I've had in video gaming. I've loved those moments. And finally, the last thing I think is a pretty solid check on the positive side for Darktide is the price. At $39.99, it's not quite AAA title priced, which it can go up to $70. And it's not bottom of the barrel. So if you want to give this a shot, it's not going to break the bank. Now the bad stuff. Like I've said before, no game launch is perfect, sadly. Yes, I agree. They should be quality tested, and they should be in good working order before game publishers release these things. I agree with you. But the current state of the art of the gaming industry is not that model. It's you push out a thing that's viable enough, and you fix it over the course of a few months, and by the time the game's been out for a year, maybe two, the game runs perfectly. I don't like it, but that's what it is. Darktide is no different. It has a couple of negatives that you have to consider before you make your purchase decision. The performance and the crashes. I can't speak to these. I haven't experienced these myself, but there's people out there who have talked about it, and you know what? I believe them, because there's been times when I've experienced those same issues with other games, and other people didn't believe they existed. So it just so happened that my system that I'm running right now is perfectly fine with whatever combination of code the devs decided to go with. But that same code may have some weirdness with other people's rigs. It happens, and I'm hoping that the developers are going to fix it, and soon, because there's nothing worse than buying a game that you're really excited to try, and it won't even launch. Bummer. So just know those issues are out there. If you buy the game, there's a chance that you may not even be able to play it. I can't say that it's more common than other game releases, but I also can't say that the issues are completely fixed either, so, take that for what you will. Here's some of the things that actually kind of bum me out about this game. They don't make the game unplayable, it just doesn't make it as engaging as it otherwise could be. I'm talking about kind of the low variety of customization options available at launch. You have a certain number of weapons, and you have your trusty las rifle or las gun. You want to dress it up, you want to have a couple of skins. Weapon skins have been a thing for a long, long time in the video game industry, and right now, as of launch, you get to pick from two. There's a red and there's a green. And the green that you can buy with in-game currency looks an awful lot like the basic unmodified green that your weapons typically come in. So you have basically 2.5 looks for your guns, and it's the same 2.5 for every variety of gun, whether it's a hand flamer, a power sword, a staff. They're all going to have red and green variants. For a game that's all about interacting with the game space through the barrel of your gun, it's kind of disappointing. Yeah, I'm sure in the future you're going to have a lot more, but it's underwhelming now. At release, having 2.5 skins, that's kind of lame. And probably most important, I know this is silly, but this is Warhammer 40K. You can get a chainsword, which, again, I love, and you can get it in red, okay, or you can get it in green, but you can't get it with the hazard stripes. What? How do you not have hazard stripes on a chainsword? Unforgivable. Okay, that one was silly, but that's how I felt. My bad. The same kind of complaint can be levied on the customization options. The clothes that you wear can be kind of underwhelming. Now here there are a few more options, but they all kind of look and feel pretty samey. And a lot of them are linked to some pretty difficult to achieve, achievements. Now one exception to this is the real world currency store that they did manage to put in, which was a matter of contention for a lot of professional level game reviewers. At the cash store, you can buy exactly one outfit for each of the 4 characters, and that's your special, awesome looking outfit. Yeah, they look fantastic. They cost about $20, which almost doubles the price of the title, which, is kind of lame, and you only get one of them, which is probably the most lame part. So if you're going to spend extra money to buy a new outfit for your character, you're going to look exactly like everyone else who also decided to spend a little bit of extra in-world money to have an awesome looking character. If everyone is awesome the same way that you are, then none of you are awesome. That's just the way that works. So those are some things that I thought were important to me, but I think the biggest issue I have with this game right now is, again, very, very personal. And that's the basic gameplay loop. That is, you choose a mission, pick out your random teammates, or maybe you have friends in the real world and you can take them to engage in this battle. But it's kind of very samey. So there's a handful of different arenas or different settings, and you do a mission. And every time you play that mission, basically it runs exactly the same way. For example, there's one assassination mission where you have to go through an environment, find a dude, and bring him to justice. And so that's one mission type, and that mission type never changes. It can be modified with what's called special conditions. So sometimes there's more zombies, sometimes there's fewer zombies, sometimes there's fog in the Hive City, and sometimes there's no lights. Literally no lights. You can't see more than beyond the tip of your chainsword. Creepy AF, makes it hard to play, but it does vary the gameplay experience a little bit. But for the most part, once you've played that mission, you've played that mission. You can escalate the difficulty, which means the baddies have more HP and they hit harder, but it's the same mission over and over and over and over. This is helped by the fact that there are a number of missions. I think it's like 8, maybe 10. I'm not 100% sure. But that seems like not a lot of content. It's 8 maps that play the same way, by and large. You're going to get the same experience, just with an increase in difficulty as your skill progresses. But that's kind of the core mechanic of the cooperative shooter. So you're either into that game type, or you're not. I happen to not be into that game type. However, because it's Warhammer 40K, I've enjoyed this game much more than I have other games that employ the same game mechanics. So, if you're into cooperative shooters, that you should have a good time here. If you're not into cooperative shooters, you might still have a good time here if you're really into Warhammer 40K. That's kind of not bad, right? It's also, in my experience, kind of light on the rewards. It's a very grindy kind of a game. You play the mission, you complete the mission, you'll get some credits and you get some experience, and you might get some kind of loot drop. They're kind of rare in my experience, and that's kind of a bummer. The only reason to launch another mission, or even the same mission again, is to gain some experience, to gain some credits, so you can buy another weapon to do it again. It's a very closed kind of a loop that it works for a lot of people. It's a very popular game style. It's not really my cup of tea. I don't see myself playing it for much past when I hit level 30 on at least a couple of my characters, and maybe they'll release some expansions. Maybe I'll come back. It's not the kind of game that I enjoy to play on the long term. I will say I've sunk in a good 10, 15 hours into the game, and I've enjoyed each of those pretty much, but I can see the end coming. So, there's that. So that's been my experience with Darktide So far, it's not so bad. I'm glad I bought it. If I had to go back and make the decision again, yeah, I would absolutely spend the $39, buy this game, enjoy it for the number of hours that I have, and be satisfied. The equation may be different for you, but now you have my experience to help you make your decision. I hope this video has helped, and if you do buy Darktide, I hope you have a good time, enjoy it, slay some poxwalkers for me. Thank you very much for watching. This has been your Average Bear Gaming. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.